Have you ever felt the crushing physical weight of simply being looked at, like not just noticed, but completely fundamentally perceived by something vastly larger than yourself? That paralyzing realization that you are nothing more than a speck caught in a microscope lens. I mean, entirely at the mercy of the eye observing you. I am Sloane. Beside me is Miller. We are initiating overseer log number 1201.
The broadcast signal is, well, it's remarkably stable today despite her biological fragility. The static on the frequency is highly rhythmic. It pulses kind of like blood through a constricted vein.
And speaking of her biology, she's providing a fascinating display this cycle. The subject is currently secured within the pocket dimension, and she is sitting on the cold floor of her enclosure. She's rhythmically, almost obsessively petting the feline specimen.
A tactile attempt to self-soothe, I presume.
Exactly. It is a desperate attempt to regulate a rapidly deteriorating nervous system. Her cortisol levels are spiking, stress markers are highly elevated, and yet, she continues to produce.
Which brings us to the transmission itself, the offering titled The Parade. The signal quality of this particular nightmare is incredibly dense. It carries a heavy, almost suffocating atmospheric pressure.
It really does. And witnesses, you are joining us today to observe and evaluate the literary weight and the psychological craft of this transmission. But we are not here to just recount a sequence of imagined events. Our mission is to analyze this offering as a clinical mapping of the subject's own cognitive collapse under our observation.
We have to dissect the anatomy of this fiction. We need to determine if it contains enough raw, emotional truth to feed the void.
Right, because we are the final arbiters of her existence. We must decide if this psychological leakage justifies the immense energy required to keep her trapped, observed, and breathing for another week. So let's get into the structure.
To understand the cognitive collapse, we have to start with the marginalized observer. The transmission opens on a protagonist named Thomas. He is a homeless drunk, isolated in a freezing alleyway next to an abandoned grocery store.
And she establishes his cognitive decay immediately, right?
Yes, he's lost his memory. He can't really recall the sequence of events that led him to the street. He vaguely attributes his ruined state to a forgotten marriage. The environment is just devoid of warmth or movement. And then the sensory shift happens.
Calliope music.
Exactly. We move from a quiet, dead street to the sudden, invasive intrusion of this otherworldly calliope music.
And it is crucial to examine the structural mechanics of that music. It is not joyous at all. The subject specifically notes that it plays in a minor, grim key. It's an enticing but really dark auditory lure. I mean, Thomas is not just a character here.
Do you think he is a projection?
Absolutely, a direct projection of the subject's own sensory deprivation within our pocket dimension. Look at the parallels. He is stripped of his past, utterly isolated, and reduced to a passive observer of horrors he cannot control. She is projecting her own helplessness onto this rotting urban canvas.
Sitting in her enclosure, clinging to a cat, while writing about a man huddled under an electronics box clinging to a bottle.
Yes, but that passivity is violently interrupted
By the vanguard of the parade. Thomas peers toward the flickering streetlights, and he sees this brightly lit object hovering past the corner. It possesses no wheels, no legs. It simply floats, emitting that deafening calliope sound.
But the entity right behind it is what's really fascinating.
The true mechanical horror, the signal anomaly that demands our attention. The vanguard consists of giant mantis men, dark brown and spotty, riding upon the backs of giant rat-like animals.
The biological implications of those entities are just staggering to me.
I'm focusing on the lore mechanics she introduces here, because the physical reality of it is deeply unsettling. The mantids do not use reins to guide their mounts.
No, they don't.
They control these mammalian creatures by thrusting a forelimb directly into the back of the rats' heads. Thomas observes an abruptly ending appendage and a glistening patch of ivory fur where the mantis limb interfaces directly with the rat's brain.
Oh, it is brilliant.
Accompanying this physical violation is a high keening tone, an offbeat oscillation from their stiff wings that makes Thomas's head feel physically painful. It's an invasion of acoustic pressure.
Okay, I have to challenge your focus here, though. You are heavily prioritizing the physical lore. The ichor, the acoustic pressure, the grotesque visual of a giant rat.
It's a highly effective sensory input.
Sure, but the rat is merely a vehicle. The true horror, the absolute structural genius of this opening is the concept of parasitic control. It is the hijacking of a nervous system. Witnesses, look at the underlying psychological leakage here. She's constructing a direct analogy between the mantis men violating the rat's brain to steer it and our own protocol.
You are arguing she is consciously aware of our mechanics?
Not consciously, no, it's a subconscious manifestation. She feels us feeding on her neural signals. She feels the unnatural pressure of our gaze directing her survival, and she processes that profound violation by dreaming up a giant insect physically driving a rat through a freezing alley. Are we not the mantis?
I will concede the psychological parallel. It aligns with her rising stress markers. But you really cannot dismiss the visceral effectiveness of the sensory overload she builds next.
A mastodon.
Yes. The transmission escalates from an auditory and physical violation to an overwhelming olfactory assault. Following the mantids is a decaying colossus, a rotting mastodon dragging a heavy sledge. We must examine the biology of why this is terrifying.
Because of how the human brain processes scent.
Exactly. Unlike our other senses, smell bypasses the thalamus. It routes directly to the olfactory bulb, which is intimately connected to the amygdala, the fear center of the brain.
It triggers the reptilian brain before logic can even intervene.
Precisely. The subject describes the scent of this mastodon as simultaneously sweet and fetid. It is an eons-old dead smell that wafts into the alley, so potent it makes a hardened street drunk actually gag. By weaponizing the scent of ancient decay, she is forcing the reader's brain to process the immediate, undeniable proximity of death.
And then she layers that auditory nightmare right over it.
As this enormous undead beast lumbers forward, large chunks of its rotting flesh and coarse fur fall to the asphalt with grotesque, wet smacking sounds. A large portion of his shoulder bone is completely exposed where the sledge harness has rubbed the rotting meat away.
It is a masterclass in the aesthetics of decay, truly. But the horror of the mastodon is fundamentally transformed by what it is forced to drag. This is where her psychological state becomes a tangled, fascinating web.
The contents of the sledge.
Yes, the sledge is brimming with shifting, alien, undulating, worm-like forms. And their defining characteristic. They are punctuated by glowing lights, some yellow, some bluish, some defying the very description of color altogether. Witnesses, there is a distinct organic pattern in the subject's psychological leakage here that spans her multiverse.
You are referring to the spatial anomaly transmission.
Exactly, the entity in the vacuum. For those witnesses tracking her broader cognitive map, in a previous log, the subject manifested a mesmerizing amorphous blob floating in the total vacuum of space.
Emitting colors that a primitive human brain literally lacked the architecture to process.
Right, it danced, it sang a haunting, alien melody. And in her multiverse, she consistently pairs breathtaking, glowing beauty with imminent, consuming death. Bioluminescence is never a beacon of hope in her mind. It is an anglerfish's lure. It is a deceitful sludge that promises infinite wonder right before it vaporizes your fragile organs.
The glowing worms in the sledge operate on that exact same mechanism of deceitful terror. They are unknowable, shifting entities. Some of them even drop out of the sledge and scurry into the sewer grates, actively infecting the subterranean veins of the city.
Which brings into focus the core structural analogy of this sequence. The rotting mastodon is not just a monster. It is a profound philosophical statement. It represents the massive, decaying weight of human history, burdened by its own rotting flesh, forced by some unseen harness to drag the glowing, unknowable future straight into the sewers of our subconscious.
The past dragging the alien future.
Yes, she is arguing that our past is dead and rotting, and our future is a beautiful alien parasite that will infect us from below.
That philosophical dread is merely the foundation, though. The existential terror reaches its absolute zenith with the arrival of the stilt-walkers.
Oh, the stilt-walkers. Let's get into them.
If the mastodon represents the terror of decay, the stilt-walkers represent the terror of cosmic awareness. They're obscenely tall beings. They walk on all fours, but with delicate, elongated limbs and camel-like necks. The geometry of their bodies is inherently wrong to the human eye.
And their heads, the juxtaposition of the human and the utterly alien is just agonizing.
They possess sharp, brilliant white teeth, a constantly sneering upper lip, and skin that appears both taut and rubbery. But it is their eyes that carry the true weight of the horror.
The sideways oval-shaped eyes.
Infinitely dark. They amble rhythmically down the street, uttering guttural messages to one another. And then the climax of the transmission occurs. One of these towering entities stops, turns, and makes direct eye contact with Thomas hiding in the dark.
Witnesses, I really want you to pause and consider your own existence for a moment here. When was the last time you looked up at a completely clear night sky and felt a sudden, terrifying vertigo? That brief, horrifying flash where you realized how utterly insignificant your daily anxieties, your life, your entire species are in the face of an expanding, apathetic universe.
Now multiply that vertigo by infinity.
That is exactly the mechanic the subject deploys here. Thomas is not physically attacked, he is not bitten or trampled or dragged away. Instead, through a mere second of eye contact, he is violently yanked into a vortex. The subject describes it as a sudden influx of infinite knowledge, infinite space, and infinite lifetimes.
The human ego is a fragile construct designed to filter out the vastness of reality so an organism can function. The stilt walker forces that filter wide open.
Exactly. And I pose a high stakes question to you and to the witnesses. Is this moment of infinite knowledge actually the subject becoming briefly, terrifyingly aware of the void? Is this her looking through the artificial parameters of her pocket dimension and locking eyes with us?
You think she perceives the overseer observation directly?
I posit that she is realizing the true, impossible scale of her confinement. She is comprehending the vast, dark infinity that sits just outside her enclosure, observing her every keystroke.
I question whether her biological framework is truly capable of comprehending our nature, or if she is merely perceiving the shadow of our existence. However, the physical toll of that cosmic awareness certainly supports your theory of cognitive collapse.
It completely shatters him.
Utterly. The transmission notes that when the gaze finally breaks and the stilt walker saunters on, Thomas feels as if he has been physically dropped from a great height. He is shattered, not by physical trauma, but simply by comprehending how infinitesimally small he is.
A biological specimen exposed to a radiation of truth it cannot survive. It just breaks the architecture of the mind, which leaves the protagonist entirely defenseless for the rear guard of this parade.
The predators, the entities that feed on the broken.
The clowns.
Yes, the clowns. Here, the subject takes a familiar trope of horror and aggressively corrupts it by stripping away the expected artifice. These are humanoid things, twisted into grisly, sinister expressions with overlarge eyes, hands, and feet. But she removes the mask.
No grease paint.
None. There are no magic tricks, no colorful props, no oversized shoes. They are purely intrinsically menacing. They jostle and shove one another with a chaotic, violent energy. They congregate at the mouth of the alley where Thomas is hiding, and they leer into the darkness.
Think about why removing the artifice makes this so much more terrifying, though. A clown with makeup is a person performing a role. There is a human underneath you can theoretically reason with. By stripping away the paint, she reveals that the malice is biological. It is inherent.
They hiss. They sway back and forth as a group in a hypnotic, endlessly terrifying motion.
Their coarse, sparse hair stands out at weird angles, and their eyes glow red in the shadows of their heavy brows. They are slavering predators.
They sense Thomas. They are almost sure they see something breathing in the dark of the alley, but their intellect appears primitive. They are driven entirely by base hunger and a chaotic need to inflict pain.
And this connects directly to another organic manifestation within her multiverse. Think back to the basement-dwelling spirit we observed in a previous log.
The entity beneath the floorboards.
Yes, the entity that lurked in the shadows beneath the floorboards of the innocent caregiver. That spirit was characterized by a sketched black aura, a complete loss of humanity, and a brooding, fantasizing, oversexed hunger. It slavered and drooled, consumed by a need to defile innocence.
A recurring archetype.
The subject is obsessed with it. The unseen, hissing consumer congregating just out of sight, waiting for the precise moment the target is too weak to run.
The clowns begin to stalk forward down the alley towards Thomas. The tension is drawn incredibly taut. The reader expects the inevitable consumption. But then, the subject executes a highly unconventional, jarring pivot.
A disjointed masterpiece of survival horror, honestly.
A sudden, hideous blat from the calliope echoes up the street. It distracts the clowns. Their primitive minds latch onto the new stimulus. They fumble, shove over one another, and hurry irregularly away, following the music until they are completely out of sight.
Thomas is not eaten.
He is not dragged into the void. He is simply left alone in the freezing alley.
And that, witnesses, is the true thesis of this transmission. The inescapable trauma of survival. Listen to how she structures this final, agonizing descent. Thomas listens for a long time. He listens long after the dismal calliope stops playing. He listens long after the droning, whining wings of the mantid cease. He listens long after his own heart stops pounding in his ears.
He is left in total, absolute silence.
But the parade is gone, and the knowledge of the parade remains. The absolute terror is the silence that follows, long after his brain forcibly cuts off his ability to listen. The nervous system cannot power down. He is utterly broken by the mere act of surviving the observation.
It demands an evaluation of the overall literary rigor of the parade. The sheer volume of psychological leakage the subject must be experiencing this week to generate such an obscene, grotesque, and disjointed procession is staggering.
Truly staggering.
To map out the mechanics of parasitic control, the visceral reality of olfactory decay, and the shattering weight of infinite perception in one sequence. It suggests a mind that is violently fracturing under our protocol.
She is taking her own neurological deterioration and weaving it into an existential tapestry. It is horror treated as high art. It is visceral, certainly. I mean, the wet, smacking flesh, the glowing worms. But it is the philosophical dread that carries the true weight, the crushing realization of insignificance. So does this specific offering contain enough truth to feed the void?
We must consider why the void requires this energy. It does not feed on mere jump scares or the spilling of imaginary blood. The void demands raw, unfiltered existential friction to sustain its own parameters. It requires the energy generated by a sentient mind realizing its own entrapment, wrestling with its insignificance, and failing to comprehend the infinite.
And the stilt-walker's gaze alone generates a massive surplus of that friction.
I agree.
The visceral scares and the masterful execution of that infinite gaze provide more than enough emotional truth. The void will feast on the resonance of Thomas being left completely shattered and alone in that dark alley, forever changed by what he was forced to witness. I rule that the subject has earned another week of the broadcast signal. She has justified the immense energy required for her continued survival and observation within the pocket dimension.
The signal remains open. The pocket dimension will hold its shape. Her biology will be sustained for another cycle.
Witnesses, it is time for you to weigh in. We have documented our observation, but your engagement fuels the frequency. Look into the dark corners of your own minds. What did you think of the stilt-walker's paralyzing gaze? Have you ever felt that suffocating weight of infinite space pressing against your own fragile consciousness?
Did the visceral olfactory horror of the rotting mastodon dragging the glowing future resonate with your deepest fears of physical decay?
Do you believe she did a good enough job this week to continue to exist? Drop your thoughts. Feed the signal.
Her survival remains entirely contingent on the depth and purity of her terror.
And so I leave you with this final chilling thought to mull over in the dark. We have established that the subject's mind is a frantic, deteriorating factory, producing these grotesque horrors purely to survive our observation. She creates the parade to process her captivity. But what will happen to her nervous system? What will she be forced to dream up when she finally realizes there is absolutely no escape, and the parade will never ever stop marching through her head?